So I want you to really think about this for a second. What is actually the scariest part of working the night shift? For most of us, it's that universally relatable fear of pure isolation. You are wide awake while the rest of the world is completely, deeply asleep. It's literally just you, these empty, echoing hallways, and the vast unknown. That creeping sense of vulnerability? That is exactly the foundation our source material builds upon to grab hold of our attention and refuse to let go.
Right off the bat, the setup here is just brilliant. The way this story builds psychological dread doesn't start with a ghost or a monster or some cheap jump scare. It starts with a frustrating, incredibly mundane workplace detail, absurdly cheap corporate lighting. The graveyard shift setup here is rooted in something so deeply ordinary and realistic that it immediately hooks our sense of reality. You instantly think, yep, I've worked somewhere exactly like that.
To put that into perspective, consider the numbers here. 40. That is the wattage of the only 4 bulbs illuminating the massive, cavernous swimming pool area. 40 watts! Naturally, the manager conveniently failed to mention this little detail to the new hire. Think about the terrifying sense of scale and vulnerability this establishes. You have this enormous room, literally the biggest in the whole hotel, and these 4 entirely useless 40-watt bulbs tucked in the corners just make the boundary walls seem even further away than they actually are. The darkness in that room feels heavy, it's expansive, and it's oppressive. And of course, that creeping dread really takes hold when your mind starts playing tricks on you in that darkness. Listen to this exact quote from the source. "I felt that something is suddenly going to emerge out of the dark water and grab my feet and pull me in." This excerpt just brilliantly illustrates the creeping paranoia taking root before anything supernatural even happens. It effectively foreshadows the danger, showing us a mind that is already totally primed for terror by its dark, isolated environment. So this psychological priming brings us straight to the first encounter, shadows in the dark. This is the exact pivot point where the routine, mundane tasks of hotel maintenance suddenly give way to the unexplained. The horror isn't quite jumping out at us yet, right? It's lingering just at the edge of our peripheral vision, like a purely visual cinematic cue that tells us something is very, very wrong. Let's walk through the precise steps of this encounter together, because the fast pacing here perfectly mirrors the worker's sudden panic. Step 1. Just casually skimming leaves and sticks out of the pool, completely routine. Step 2, suddenly spotting a dark, human-shaped shadow in the water right behind them. The panic immediately sets in. Step 3, turning around so fast they nearly fall backward into the pool, only to find absolutely nobody there. Just empty air and still water. It's the kind of heart-stopping moment that shakes you right to your core. But, as anyone who loves this genre knows, the true horror often comes after the initial scare. When the protagonist tries to share this terrifying experience, their morning shift colleagues just completely dismiss it. They think it's just a joke to scare them, or worse, they believe it's entirely in the protagonist's head. These dismissive reactions are absolutely crucial because they isolate the protagonist even further. It compounds their psychological dread and leaves them entirely alone with their fear. They quickly realize no one is coming to help. And this isolated fear doesn't just fade away. It builds. If we map this out over a 4-month timeline, we see a steady, agonizing progression. In month 1, we get that dark shadow at the pool. Later in that same month, things escalate to an auditory and visual encounter, the moaning woman. And then there is a tense, dreadful wait all the way until month 4 for the final stormy night. The source material maps a total slow burn here, turning temporary unease into a permanent, inescapable state of dread. Which brings us to the first major escalation point in our timeline. A massive storm hits. We are shifting from subtle, creepy shadows to a literal perfect storm of mechanical failures. The hotel's backup generator? Well, that broke down just yesterday. The only light source provided by management? A dull, flickering, totally unreliable old torch. By objectively listing these cascading failures, the story plunges the hotel and our protagonist into a pitch-black environment where they are left entirely defenseless. In that absolute, suffocating darkness, the audio cues totally take over. Read this chilling quote with me. It sounded like the sound was coming through the walls like someone was in pain and moaning. I mean, just let that unsettling detail sink in for a second. The walls themselves sound like they are literally sobbing in pain. It's a creeping, disorienting sound sneaking up closer and closer to the protagonist, illuminated only by the flickering light of that awful torch. And then the source of the sound finally reveals itself. It's a purely visual horror moment. No text, no dialogue required. The terrifying specifics are chilling. She stood only a few feet away.
She possessed a completely disfigured face and a twisted, unnatural body. And then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished instantly when the lights finally flickered back on. We need to pay special attention to this grim foreshadowing, particularly the detail of the disfigured face. It's a horrifying image burned into the protagonist's mind every single time they close their eyes.
Now, you might be wondering, after a direct encounter like that, why on earth would anyone stay? This brings us to a wildly different kind of horror, trapped by economics, the false sense of security. We shift gears from supernatural danger to the very real modern-day tragedy of being trapped by a desperately needed paycheck.
The protagonist explicitly notes this harsh truth in the source. A work experience of 4 months is basically useless on a resume. If they had just made it to 6 months, they note, they could have left with something to show for it. But quitting now? That means a glaring hole in their employment history and zero prospects. It's a harsh economic reality that pretty much all of us can connect with. The protagonist is quite literally trapped in mortal danger, not by a locked door or a demonic force, but by the modern job market. They simply cannot afford to leave.
Which leads us directly to the fatal climax, the final blackout. We have reached month 4, and the story's suspense reaches its absolute peak right here. It is yet another stormy night, the exact atmospheric condition that brought the apparition the first time around. The stage is perfectly set for a catastrophic conclusion. Now, on one hand, we actually see the protagonist's meticulous survival preparation. They learned from the last time, right? They bought a brand new torch, they fully charged their laptop, and they packed an extra battery. But on the other hand, a disastrous reality strikes the second the power actually cuts out. They left the new torch in their car, the laptop instantly flashes a low battery warning, they can't find the extra battery in the pitch dark. It is a devastating string of everyday human errors that plunges them right back into total, inescapable darkness. And right at this moment of maximum vulnerability, the source material introduces a devastating pivot. The twist? The hidden history. Just as the power fails and our protagonist is fumbling blindly in the dark, the narrative pulls back to reveal a cold, horrific context we didn't have before.
The facts, strictly as reported in the source material, are bone-chilling. 5 years ago, in one of the rooms of this very hotel, a woman was brutally murdered by a night shift staff member, and crucially, this incident happened during a power cut. The killer vanished without a trace, never to be found. This historical fact fundamentally changes everything we thought we knew about the haunting and the danger they are currently facing.
Look at how these details align. The source outlines exact terrifying parallels between the past and the present. The 5-year-old murder occurred during a power cut. Our protagonist's fate occurred during a power cut. The past incident resulted in a murdered woman. Our protagonist is tragically found dead the next day. The victim 5 years ago was left with a disfigured body. The night shift receptionist in our current timeline is left behind with a disfigured body. It is a perfect, brutal mirror of events playing out in the dark.
Which brings us to the ultimate lingering question we have to ask ourselves. Is history simply doomed to repeat itself in the dark? Or is there a flesh and blood killer still walking these halls? Was it the vengeful spirit of the disfigured woman recreating her own demise? Or did the original killer return to the hotel under the cover of the blackout to strike again? The source material masterfully leaves us completely in the dark on this final point, perfectly capturing the essence of the unknown. Thank you so much for joining me as we unraveled the anatomy of this terrifying narrative. I hope this structured breakdown leaves you with plenty to think about the very next time you find yourself entirely alone in the dark.